Thank you. So, welcome to another session of Coffee DBG. And how many of you have been part of last session where Praveen Vijay talked about front-end, redefining front-end workflow? I will not be asking any questions. Okay. Okay, that's fine. So, I will just do a quick recap on what we discussed last month. Is there anyone who want to do that? Faiz? Okay, so last month we have been discussing about the dramatic change that happened in the front-end workflow. Previously, previously we were just dealing with HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, but there are a lot of new technical terms that came into picture, right? Which make the front-end developers think that it is not something that is easy to adopt because they think that it is very confusing and complex. Right? So Praveen Vijay gave a session where he explained how we redefined the front-end workflow in his company with all these tools. Okay. So in his session, he talked about Yeoman, Less, NPM, Grunt, Bower, SASS, SCSS, Stylus, Jade, Middleman, Jenkins, Brunch, Gull. So how many terms are familiar for you? Which are the terms that are familiar? Almost all the terms are familiar. So those who have started using the new front-end workflow, these terms should be familiar, but for others, the main problem is like relating this to what exactly it falls. For example, there are some languages, there are some tools, some items are process, some are standards, etc. So listening to a lot of new terms, and whenever we are trying to adopt these things, it is always confusing. So actually from the last session we understood that it is a little bit confusing, but it is not that much complex, and we should be able to do all these things, right? So this month we are about to deal about SCSS or SASS, or both same. Both are almost same, just some difference in syntax, right? So let's see what he explained last time. So normally, how do you start coding when you want to do a front-end? How many front-end developers are there? Almost all are front-end developers, right? So at my time, or long before, when I started doing the first CSS and stuff like that, I used to start with a fresh file, start writing the HTML, and CSS was embedded there, then started using some new file and added CSS there. But later, we started, that is when we have some CSS files already built, when we start a new project, we just reuse that CSS file. So that is what is, right now they are calling as scaffolding, right? So scaffolding is a process of making use of something already existing and start working above that. So then we got a lot of CSS frameworks that was available. We just download it and start building above that. Then what is the difference that happened? What was the difference in that scaffolding process that Praveen Vijay explained last month? There is nothing, but just these things were automated. Previously, we have to go and search for all these things, download all these things to our local machine. If there is some dependencies are there, all those dependencies also we need to download and start coding. Instead of that, he just showed how we can do it using Yeoman. Yeoman has some generators and we can use it to build all those frameworks to our local machines automatically. So once the scaffold is there, then he showed us how we can use the package manager NPM to bring all the dependencies to our local machine. So normally we were doing it from scratch, one by one downloading. Instead of that, base will be there, then npm install one command, it will look for a file called package.json, right? And then all the dependencies will come to our local machine and it is ready, set to start coding. So making things easier. It is not complex, but it is just a little bit of confusion just because of lot of names in the space. So Yeoman, NPM, we understood, right? Yeoman is just like a scaffolding tool which helps us to create the scaffold. And then NPM is a package manager which helps us to get all those packages as well as get the dependencies. And for NPM, we need Node install. Because previously, we just, whenever we used to include some scripts or JavaScript libraries, the help file will say that hey, include this script in the head tag. That was the documentation. But right now, we see that install Node.js, npm install, etc. That is the way it is starting. So actually, it is not that much complex, but if we can follow each of these things, then we can understand that it is something simple, but little bit confusing unless we know what to use, where to use, and when to use. Okay. So after bringing all these things, then Praveen Vijayan started coding. Started coding in some language which we were not knowing. We were expecting him to write the code in HTML and CSS. And we were seeing that he is writing in something else with some alignments and stuff like that. So we were wondering what is this. So then he explained it is called Jade. Jade is a templating engine. And then he was writing SCSS with Java, CSS with some variables were declared, some loops, if condition, else condition, etc. Then we were wondering how could we do this in CSS and whether the browser will understand all these things. Because we know that browser will understand only HTML, JavaScript and CSS. That is what we learn. So whether these things will be understood by the browsers. So that was the major confusion at that time. Then he told that no, it is not the way. These things are not directly passed by the browsers. Browser still knows HTML, JavaScript and CSS, but we use some build tools to generate HTML and CSS out of these templates. So that is where this gulp, grunt and all these things comes, which is known as build tools. So we use some other language, better CSS, like SCSS, and then write all those things efficiently or much quickly and generate normal HTML and CSS and provide to the development team. You just start using this HTML and CSS. While the front-end developers maintains its code in Jade or SCSS, etc. So that is what we learned last month. So once we understood that, then Yeoman, it's okay. It is just like a build tool. It's a scaffolding tool, and there is middleman and branch, right, etc. Those are also similar space. That is that those are also scaffolding tools. If we do not want to use Yeoman, we can use branch or middleman. So I will strike off those things. Then npm bower, right? Bower is something another package manager. Gem is another package manager for Ruby. So these are package managers that help us to download these things. These are just tools. Then we learned about less Jade, SCSS, then stylus, etc. SCSS, stylus, less, etc. are CSS preprocessors. What is a preprocessor? It is just something that helps us to generate CSS. Okay. So there are a lot of preprocessors available, and this session what Shiraz is going to take is not to compare between these different preprocessors and help you to select which one is the best one, but it is just to help you start using any of these preprocessors, because it is just like these things help us to save a lot of extra effort, and why we are still going back to the old way when there are some new methods which help us to do things efficiently is available. Okay. So I would like to welcome Shiraz to give you a session on SCSS. So from the part what we discussed earlier, I will just do a recap again. We start scaffolding using some scaffolding tools. then npm to bring all the dependencies there. Then we start coding in some new language, and then generate HTML, CSS, and then use it. So here something new is that new languages that we have to learn. And let's see whether it is so complex to adopt or not. If you know the basics of programming, this will be very, very simple, and it is not going to be any complex, and you can just sit back, relax, and enjoy the session. Thank you.